Welcome to Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet with Ryan Poterack from Poterack Capital Advisory. You have unique values, objectives, fears, life experiences, and biases. Any financial professional who ignores or minimizes the importance of your story may not be able to help you achieve your ideal outcomes or hit your goals. It's time to experience the PCA difference. In this podcast, we help business executives, soon-to-be retirees, and solutions-based individuals overcome the anxiety leading up to their upcoming years. We do this by initiating in-depth discussions about the financial aspects of retirement, like tax planning and asset allocation, alongside, and often overlooked, personal and lifestyle aspects. Join us on this journey where we explore retirement from a contrarian point of view, as Ryan draws from years of expertise and guest experts to help you explore the true purpose of your money in retirement and the impact you want to make in your golden years. Now, on to the show.
Our relationship with money can get complicated. What you think is important may not seem that way to someone else, including those close to you. Your host, Ryan Poterack, has seen a lot of these situations in his years as a financial professional. I'm Patrice Sikora. And Ryan, how do you get people to stop beating themselves up when it comes to money decisions?
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, hello, Patrice. Good to see you again, or good to hear you again. And, I wrote a chapter in my book, Don't Should on Yourself. And
let's make that don't should on yourself, right?
It is. That's what I said. Now, maybe I slurred or put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, but nonetheless, and if I've got an opportunity to inject humor in anything, I do. But the reality of it is, and where I was coming from with that chapter, is that as we grow up, we hear from our parents and maybe teachers, educators, grandparents, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. And, a lot of that kind of high level is, okay, you should graduate high school, you should go to college, you should approach relationships in a certain way, maybe not partake in certain actions or activities before you get married. And then also the framework, whether it's politically or financially, the framework for any of us growing up is very much dictated typically by the household, by the parents. And so if I go back a couple of generations, like I was really close to my grandparents, even as I got to be a young adult, but they were out of the Depression era. And they also lived in the same house typically for most of their life. So looking at, okay, for example, buying a house is the most important thing you can do, and that's going to build wealth. That doesn't play the same way as it did two generations ago. So there's a lot of you should do this, you should do that can have some merit. I would say that it has merit in that is a topic that you should discuss. Benefits, limitations, pros, cons, because then you can get at the core of, well, how does it really pertain to you? Because any of our listeners out there, whatever your age is your situation in any way different than your parents' situation when they were your age? And probably is the case, and therefore the shoulds may not apply. And I'm big on critical thinking, Patrice. I just if an audience is all moving to the left side, I'm going to go over to the right side and kind of check it out. And then if I say, well, the left side does look better, then at least I've done my due diligence on thinking critically. And so that, as a contrarian in just about everything, business and personal, that's also at the core, and some of that is psychology, but it's at the core of how I approach questions or problem solving.
I like the idea, though, because if you go to that right-hand side where nobody else is, you find out what's going over there. You take that knowledge back to the left side so that everybody over there can benefit from what you've learned.
And you get to the point, we have people in this world that are followers and people who are not afraid to step out. And both of those hypothetical people can be fantastic people, but it can be scary to step out from the crowd. So when I'm working with a couple, so it's just me and them, and we're going to talk about strategies that may not fit into how they were raised and all of their you should do's. I respect that and have a conversation around it to really just provide some knowledge and situational experience that might open them up to follow the same analogy, to tiptoeing to the other side of the room to just kind of see what it's like.
Right. Well, these past experiences too that someone has, they they can set you up with biases you don't even realize you hold.
Absolutely. We very early on in my discovery process, I have it's kind of a tool I guess I invented, but it's a client bias exercise, because when it comes to investing and coming to different financial decisions and such throughout our lives, we may have made some mistakes, or at least looking back on it. Of course, that's really the only way we identify mistakes. We don't say, well, this is going to be a mistake, now I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do it.
So we make mistakes that might have to do with financial decision making, or we have friends, relatives, people that we know and like and trust that made mistakes, and they're saying, don't ever do this, or you shouldn't do that, even though the particular product or strategy, it may have been the misapplication of that product or strategy. In other words, the product or strategy isn't wrong. It's just how it was applied in the situation at the time was incorrect. So as I go through, like early on in my process, I simply asked, for example, there's about 11 different financial strategies. And I just indicate, Patrice, that as I mention each one, I just want a gut reaction. Does it give you a positive feeling in your gut, a negative feeling in your gut, or neutral? And if you're not familiar with the strategy, no problem. I don't know is always an acceptable answer with me. I'll just put that in the neutral category. And then I might say individual stocks, Patrice, positive, negative, neutral. And on and on. I'm, get into other strategies or other products. And that is extremely helpful to me, because ideally there is no positive or negative to a strategy or product. It's like saying a tool in a toolbox is good or bad, or a medication that a physician might prescribe is good or bad. It's all about appropriate application to bring about an outcome that the person you're serving is seeking. So if people have, as I go through that, if they have negative biases, and that exercise takes 3 or 4 minutes, I circle back, Patrice, and say, Patrice, I see you have a negative bias against, I don't know, corporate bonds. How did that come into being? I mean, you weren't born with that. And I do that on all the strategies, but typically, Patrice, the answer is completely disconnected from just simply how do corporate bonds work. It's like, well, I had this, that, it didn't work out. And when I go through that exercise, I am just gathering information. I don't start going off on a tangent. Well, you don't actually understand how corporate bonds work, Patrice, blah, blah, blah. No, I am gathering information, because down the line, later in my discovery process, if it becomes appropriate that I recommend something that is in your best interest, that you and I uncovered early in the process, whereby you have a negative bias against it, then I know that I need to help you understand that. Now, if your negative bias is about a particular strategy that has no application in your situation, who cares? We don't have to even waste time on it. But if it is in your best interest as a fiduciary, I have a responsibility to share with you why that would help bring about the outcomes you tell me you want. And then at the same time, and this is what I say to people I'm working with in the process, almost verbatim. But then I say, Patrice, I never forget whose money it is. It's your money, Patrice. And if you're uncomfortable with any strategy, no problem. We'll just move on to the next best recommendation. But one thing the audience should not expect from Ryan Poterack is to simply be a yes man to go along with. I think we need to have a respectful partnership relationship when we work with clients and families. So I've found that tool to be extremely helpful. One other thing on the since we're in the psychology podcast that I find interesting, and again, I've said in a prior podcast that, we work with a lot of people that might be in their 50s and above and transitioning from employment to retirement. And also oftentimes in that generation, again, couple, husband, wife, the husband may have, again, more interest than the wife. And so when I have the husband and wife and I go through this exercise, as I name off each strategy, I let them know, hey, I'm gonna ask, the wife first and get her positive, negative, or neutral about whatever the strategy is. And then I go to the husband. So it would be, for example, Patrice, individual stocks, positive, negative, or neutral. And then I'd go Mr. Patrice, positive, negative, neutral on individual stocks. And I go through that with every single one. Well, the reason why I asked the woman first is because what I've found with couples, at least of a certain generation, if I would have asked the husband first, then the wife, I'd get a lot of, yeah, what he said. Yeah, I agree with what he said.
Okay.
And when I asked the wife first, I get what her legitimate gut reaction is. And the male ego, when I go to the husband, the male ego will not allow typically the husband to agree with his wife in this area unless he actually agrees with his wife. So I've just found from my 3 decades plus that gives me a more authentic, true representation of both of the individuals in the couple about how they feel regarding biases with various strategies.
Right. Interesting. But it does make sense when you explain it. Do you find that some of these biases or preferences perhaps come about because they are comparing themselves to someone they know, be it a family member or friend? Well, it worked for them. That's why I like it.
Sure. Yeah. Life experience. And it's not, and we're right now, we're in an area that in prior podcasts, we've talked about how are we unique? How are we different? This is a completely unique area because somebody having a bias is human nature and natural. I'm not meaning to convey that it is negative, but it's very important for me in my role working with a couple to be aware of it. And so for a client to say what you just said, my friend, my neighbor, whatever did this, it was awesome. That's what they believe. That's what they think. It may be true. It may be disconnected from the facts, but it's important that I know it. So then I can have a conversation around it that is understanding and respectful, and maybe get at the core, because they might just like the strategy because it worked, because the neighbor said it worked, but that doesn't mean they understand it, the mechanics of the strategy or how it applies to their situation. And so rather than being dismissive, well, what does your neighbor know? Is your neighbor educated? Is it, that's not helpful to the people I'm, attempting to serve. It's more fleshing it out. And in our discovery process, as I've said before, where we create an environment of exchange that's not in a hurry, we have the opportunity, I think, to flesh out those kinds of experiences and ultimately arrive at solutions that may absolutely incorporate on some level what their neighbor's been doing, but they'll do it with a little bit more knowledge of why it's also a good fit in their situation.
And maybe what their neighbor is not telling them didn't work for them.
Yeah, cocktail parties are out back barbecuing. You don't talk about the really
right.
stupid mistakes you made. And gosh, I bought, whatever. I won't use any company names, but yeah, yep.
All right, talk to me more about this critical thinking idea that you use. What is it that you ask yourself to start the thought process?
Well, both in running PCA, coaching other advisors, and working with clients, I might say, why wouldn't you want to do this? So I'm getting in conversations, and let's say that a strategy for a particular couple seems to be perfect. I think that we should implement it. They think we should implement it. I might say, let's just stop and take the flip side of the coin. Let's try and poke. Why wouldn't we want to do this? Because I believe that every decision is a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the client and I are believing that a particular decision is proper, but then I kind of reverse it so that they also demonstrate to me or with me what is that trade-off. Then to me, that gives them extra confidence. It's not something that just because, let's say, they're agreeing with me and we're going along and this is a great strategy, they might not know the trade-off. They might be acting like, okay, I'm fully informed, and I mean acting in an unconscious way, but I'm not afraid to say, well, why shouldn't we do this? Now, part of that I think comes from the core of we're a fiduciary firm, and so it from a compensation state, from my self-interest, it makes no difference if we go with strategy A versus strategy B. But that's one. Mm-hmm. That's one element. It comes into play sometimes with, again, my team at PCA, and unfortunately, somewhat unfortunately, as the leader of my firm, when I say things, people might go along or not challenge me, even though I do my best to solicit conflict, frankly, and pushback. And so that I've found a way that's helpful is, okay, we're all on board to implement this new initiative. We're excited how it's going to add value to the families we serve. Well, why wouldn't we want to do that? And sometimes I get some stunned looks and wide eyes. And I said, so why wouldn't we? Let's make the counter case. And I've just always found that to be healthy in my own personal life too, as I work through decision making.
But it also it shows that you understand, you've gone through the thinking process, the pros, the cons. It's one of the things, when you can teach something, then you know it. If you can rip it apart and look at it from both sides, then you understand it, you know it.
And our audience knows that not everything in life goes exactly as planned. And so in effect, inherent in that is okay, what could go wrong?
Right.
And then sometimes that can be comforting to know, okay, that's really kind of the worst case scenario and is also unlikely. But if it happens, it happens. But still, the right decision is to move forward.
What about deal breakers?
Well, that gets very individualized. I mean, for me, I've grown to appreciate clarity, simplicity and clarity wherever it may be found. And as a business person, following our protocols, our framework, I believe allows us to better serve the public. And if I start to say, okay, I'm going to accept X, Y, and Z that I'm not principally aligned with, and I just kind of sort of tongue in cheek, but it doesn't matter how much wealth a person has if they're rude, if they're arrogant. They could be arrogant early on when I meet them, but they need to modify that so that it just shows up to me as, okay, they were just nervous or whatever. So working with life is too short. Working with people that I wouldn't want to spend my own personal time with is a deal breaker for me. Now and again, not very often, I've had people ask me to, for lack of anything better way to describe it, is to be a little shady, so to speak. Because we do a lot of tax planning and tax mitigation. And I mean, my line is always, you don't want to get anywhere near the electric fence. The IRS and the government doesn't play games. But people will, not often, but there are people like that. So certainly that's a deal breaker. Integrity. With, you had asked ideal client, but it's important that people that I work with and that I serve are candid and forthright. And if people are unwilling to answer my questions, that's close to a deal breaker. What would be a deal breaker is if they're unwilling to explain what about answering my question is so unique. Make the case. Give me a sense of why that question you're just not comfortable answering. Because I have to understand. I don't need any business from any household, but we want to help people. But that goes to somewhat of our due diligence, as we've talked in prior podcasts about, does it make sense for us to work with this particular family over time? And again, it's not a bad answer. It's not a wrong answer. I respect it's their money, but it just wouldn't be aligned with where we're at.
All right. Now you've got a word. You sent me some notes for this podcast, and I appreciate that. And I looked at this word and went, huh? It's a yabbit. You say, don't let yourself get overrun by yabbits. Tell me about yabbits.
Well, yabbits are excuses. It can be, it's people. So let's say a person wants, they have an objective, and then I start to share strategies or ways to approach to get the objective. There are people in this world that will tell you for every solution, they have 5 reasons why it won't work. And so that can get tiresome, frankly. So I might say, well, do you, so about a particular strategy, do you agree with this part of the strategy? Yes. Do you agree with this? Yes. So I'm in effect helping them step by step to understand why the strategy fits what they're trying to achieve. And then they go into all of the yabbits, yabbit this, yabbit that. And, if we can't get beyond that, it's like, okay, if your point is, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, that anything can happen in life and something could go wrong, I totally agree. But we can't, and you can't manage your wealth to the lowest common denominator of what possibly could go wrong. I mean, it's an interesting industry where it's completely intangible versus many, many, many other consumer decisions we make. And also, a financial professional can guarantee almost nothing in terms of future outcomes. So everything is about risk management. Everything is about probabilities. Everything is about communicating with that couple so that there's an equal understanding of that relationship, the trade-offs, the risk versus reward, what could happen in a worst case scenario. But ultimately, you need to move beyond yabbits and get to, as my grandpa used to say, fish or cut bait, one way or the other. Yes. It's like, we need to make progress here. If you want me to fish, you cut bait, no problem. But we got to do one or the other and get moving forward.
And let's take that to the other extreme. People who are saying, yeah, but what about the others who say, I don't care, just do it. I don't care, just do it.
That happens as well. On one hand, as the professional, and I'm sure this is true of an attorney or a physician or whatever, dentist on down the line, I wish it was always easy enough to say, okay, this is what you need to do, and we're going to do it, because it just saves a bunch of time, frankly. And I don't have a conflict of interest in the recommendation. However, I've come to, over the years of experience, to realize it's cutting a corner, because while the client could be completely on board with what I say, but unless I can confirm that they understand it retroactively, if the strategy doesn't go the way we intend it, which again is, I can't promise, that's how life in this industry works. If something goes wrong, the client has, I'll call it an excuse, and I don't have it in my file notes that we really dug down and assured that the client knew what we were going to do. Because that client could say, well, I just trusted him. I believed in him that it was going to do X, Y, and Z, and it didn't. And I didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, when there are situations that can go south, so to speak, right. And this is a highly regulated industry, Patrice. So me having case notes and taking the extra step to assure that they have at least a basic understanding of what we're doing is important. But I tell you, earlier on in my career, because it is natural. Yes, I trust you, Ryan. Whatever you say, that feels great to hear those words, and it still does. But I need to get a little bit more.
Gotcha. Well, Ryan, is there something we have not touched on yet in this podcast you want to make sure we do?
I guess one thing for maybe our younger listeners out there is that the surest path to wealth has nothing to do with what stock you invest in or maybe the more fun, sexier side of the industry. It is a psychology of paying yourself first, developing the discipline. So, and if for people of my generation or older, if you're thinking of your adult children, young adult children or grandchildren, establishing the habit of saving money is, I think, one of the best things that a young person can do. It's not difficult. They can set up between their checking account and an investment account, $25 a month, $100 a month, but establish that discipline to save over time. And what I mean by pay yourself first is, as we all become young adults and maybe we establish a car payment, we have a rent payment, a mortgage payment, electric bill, blah, 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 blah. But then we look at, okay, I'm going to save what's left over, instead of saying, okay, I'm a young Ryan and I'm going to pay myself 10% of what my paycheck is. And then I'm going to go get the apartment. And then I'm going to go car shopping and all that kind of stuff. So treating your own future as a bill, because you would not blow off credit card payments and such, I think is really important psychologically, because the old man Ryan might wonder what the young man Ryan did with all the money. And so that's what I would add, Patrice, as we come to near a close here.
All right. Well, Ryan, how can people reach you?
Well, they can always go to our website at www.poterack.net. Poterack is Poterack, and it's .net. They can always call our office at 704-366-5776, or check out our social media on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. So we're not difficult to find, and we'd love to get acquainted.
All right. And listeners, don't fall into the shoulda or yabbits hole. See what I did there, Ryan? Did you see that? Yabbits hole? Follow this podcast.
I think you'll have to work on that a little bit, Patrice, but offline.
Offline. All right. But follow the podcast. You know the deal. You get every episode. You'll know when it's ready for you, and share with others. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, or get a copy of Making It Count, Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet by Ryan Poterack, visit www.poterack.net or give us a call at 704-366-5776. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Poterack Capital Advisory. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Poterack Capital Advisory does not offer legal or tax advice. Please consult the appropriate professional regarding your individual circumstances. Nothing contained herein is to be considered a solicitation, research material, an investment recommendation, or advice of any kind. The information contained herein may contain information that is subject to change without notice. Any investments or strategies referenced herein do not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or particular needs of any specific person.
Product sustainability must be independently determined for each individual investor. Poterack Capital Advisory explicitly disclaims any responsibility for product suitability or suitability determinations related to individual investors.